Okay, I think I have Facebook Live going and I'm going to start recording, or I did start recording.
And Greg, I can see you, I just can't hear you. Can we hear you, Greg? Is that your phone number?
I got my phone up. Can you hear me? Let me mute on my speakers.
Sounds good.
Can y'all hear me?
We can.
You can?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And thank you for everyone who's joined so far. We'll be getting going in just a minute.
Okay.
And I think I recognize most of the names on here, so you guys have registered, but if anyone's came on that hasn't filled out that Google form, I will put that in the chat.
I had a question from some NRCS personnel in Oklahoma. Are you going to record this and then post it later?
Yes, it will be posted on our Facebook today, right after the meeting is over. We'll get it on YouTube ASAP, and I'll send out a link early next week to everyone that has both of those links in them.
Morgan, we are now live on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Once again, for everyone who's just joining in, thank you so much for coming and supporting us today and your interest in rotational grazing. I have quite a few registration, and like I said, I think I recognize most of these names, but if you're just joining in or if you're on Facebook and you haven't registered through the Google form, that's how we track our impact. That's how we know who is here. So if you wouldn't mind going through to do that, if you need that link or if you're having a hard time accessing it through Facebook or on the chat, you can email me at morgan@irwp.org and we'll get that taken care of for you. All right, Nicole, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started then. Once again, thank everyone for joining in via Facebook and via Meet today to support us at IRWP, and most of all for your interest in rotational grazing practices and land stewardship. We're so excited to be able to offer this programming to you guys in lieu of doing a real field tour. If that's something we need to do next year, I'm sure we can. But today we're going to go over the concepts and get you guys' brains rolling with questions. So without further ado, I'll get started. First of all, I want to introduce our guests. We have speaker Greg Watkins with NRCS, or Natural Resources Conservation Service. He will be speaking today about the benefits and watering and fencing systems. And then we have Doug Galloway from U of A, who's a producer, who is going to be on the panel answering questions. So Greg's going to get a second to talk to you guys in a minute. But Doug, do you want to unmute and kind of introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your history and what makes you the expert.
Oh, I don't know about an expert, but I sure get taught a lot of lessons every day. I'm third generation rancher in southeast Oklahoma. My grandfather purchased that ranch in about 1937 out of the Cherokee allotments. And probably our big awakening moment was the drought of 2011. Everybody probably remembers that. And I know as I went through it and came through it, that I realized a lot of the practices we were doing were causing a lot of our issues. And so, that changed our mindset. And we started, we just went everywhere, listening to a lot of regenerative, minded people about things we could do, to get ideas and to kick ideas around with them. But really what it boiled down to was our soil water cycle. We had to get that soil or that water into our soil, because 86% of the ranch soils hold less than 3.5 inches of water. And so if you can't store your water and manage your grazing, you're not going to have anything when times gets tough. So that's kind of, what started us out. I've been here at the University of Arkansas since '89. I worked on a master's degree, finished that up in the mid '90s, and then stayed on staff to manage a ruminant nutrition lab. And so we've got our own little analytical lab. We mainly service within the Department of Animal Science, but we also do some outside samples. And then I've done work out at the stocker and cow-calf units at Savoy, some work over at Batesville, and at a period of time I was doing work at Newport for my graduate degree. So I've been around cattle my whole life, and grazing and various things, and so now we have our own program in Oklahoma. It's us. And so when you own the cattle and you have to manage the cattle and you're remote like we are, you really have to think and plan ahead and learn. And like I said, every day that I go back there, it's a learning lesson. So that's really, does that help?
It does. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for being here with us today and helping to answer people's questions.
You're welcome.
Our IRWP staff is, of course, me. I'm the community relations manager here. So if you received our newsletters or postcards, that's probably from me. Feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, my email is morgan@irwp.org. I can help connect you with resources or just let you know more about IRWP. Travis Cheney is going to be talking to you guys a little bit later on about the work that he does as a restoration specialist here at IRWP. And then, of course, we have Nicole Hardiman, our executive director here, and as questions come up about water quality, I'm sure she'll be able to help as well. So just before we really dive in, of course, this is the year of virtual. When we have these face-to-face field tours, there's more of an opportunity to have conclusive discussions, is what I've learned. So after this is over, if you have any further questions or need to reach out, please do. We're here for you. Please sign in on the Google form. Like I said, that's how we track our impact. It's really important for us to be able to know that you attended the event. And then just administratively, please, we encourage questions. Please put those in the comments in the chat, but do keep the mics muted if you're on Google Meet until we ask or prompt for questions. So about IRWP, we are a 14-year-old nonprofit, non-governmental organization. Our learning center and where Nicole and I are today is in Cave Springs, Arkansas, right across from the beautiful Watershed Sanctuary. And our territory covers this region, which encompasses a large amount of Washington and Benton County, and then, of course, Delaware, Adair, Cherokee, and Sequoia counties. And then if you're not familiar with what a watershed is, it's kind of like a drainage basin. So the activity that happens here affects water downstream into Oklahoma. So in the context of rapidly urbanizing Northwest Arkansas, we've done a lot, but there's still a lot that we want to work on, and that's why we're here talking to you guys today. So IRWP's mission is to improve the integrity of the Illinois River watershed through public education, outreach, and implementation of conservation and restoration practices throughout the watershed. So today we are hitting you with this public education portion of this video. So last year, we were able to implement 404 acres of rotational grazing systems, 106 acres of forest stand improvement, 19 custom conservation plans. And if you're not sure what that is, our restoration specialist, Travis, will go out and kind of look and determine what the goal is, typically from a water quality perspective, and help figure out where to plant and where to do different things. So 19 of those got created last year. And we were able to forest and grass riparian buffers 9.53 acres for a total of 2,405 linear feet of stream bank protection. So that's what we do. that's what our goal is to, increase this impact. And just for some context, we have 5.6 million acres of pasture land in Arkansas, over 23,000 beef farms, and just on the Arkansas side of our watershed, there are 245,000 acres. So with that 404 acres implemented last year, we have a lot of opportunity here to teach people about these sort of alternative grazing methods, which end up helping water quality. So like I said, our goal is really implementation. The best way it was put to me is more farmers means more farms, which means clean water. And right here is a before and after of a riparian restoration that we did on Sager Creek in Siloam Springs. So you'll see the 10-year difference here. And this tree cover allows for the water to stay cool. It keeps algae from blooming. It's going to keep the ecosystem vibrant there. There's going to be all kinds of plant and macroinvertebrate habitat built from being able to protect the stream with these plantings. And so, of course, the education part doesn't end here. We have an online learning center that was launched this year. We have a tab on rotational grazing, of course. If you have any feedback on that, or if there are any messages, ideas, thoughts, or resources that you didn't see there that you want to see, please do reach out. But you can go to the online learning center to see all of our suites of practice and learn more about those there. And our role is to connect you with the resources you need to implement a practice overall. So if there's nothing else you get from that, just know IRWP is here to help you. And then before I pass it over to Greg, one last thing is that we are a nonprofit, so we do take donations. So whether you're watching this right now live or you're watching it later, we thank you so much for your support and the contribution of your view or your registration. But ultimately, during giving season, if you feel compelled, you can donate through Facebook. So with that, I will pass it on over to Greg.
Okay, Morgan, you hear me?
I can.
Okay, let me see if I can get this to present, and if not, we'll just I'll let you run the slides, and I'll just prompt you for the next one. Okay, let me see if I can make this happen. Hang on.
We can see it, Greg. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so ready to go then? Okay. Okay, here we go. We ready? Okay, good morning. I am Greg Watkins. As Morgan introduced me, I work for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in Fayetteville, and I want to thank Illinois River Watershed Partnership for inviting me to make this presentation today. IRWP, led by Nicole Hardeman, does great work in promoting water quality in this very important Northwest Arkansas and Northeast Oklahoma watershed. I work with livestock producers in the Northwest Arkansas area to improve their livestock grazing operations. And I'm speaking this morning on rotational grazing, the concepts and the benefits, as well as improvements of fence installation and water development that can be made on a farm to facilitate a rotational grazing system. All right, let me see if I can get on. Okay. If you as a livestock producer want to utilize the forage resource as the primary source of feed for your grazing operation, you must approach this task with the mindset to manage the green growing leaves to capture as much sunlight as possible so the forage plants can photosynthesize to sustain the plant, protect the land, and feed your livestock. This can be a change in thinking to view your forage as comprised of grass and other livestock edible plants, such as clover or other forbs, as performing more than just the task of providing inexpensive feed to a grazing animal. The forage on your land also has to sustain itself, and it is the only thing on your landscape that is protecting the most important resource that you have on your farm, the topsoil. To accomplish this, you must learn how to maximize the solar energy that beams down to your farm every day. To do that, you've got to do that through green growing leaves, which are in effect little solar panels. Think of your forage plants from a gardening viewpoint. Most gardeners understand that if you go onto a tomato plant and you pick off every leaf while at the same time picking your tomatoes, that tomato plant won't do very well to continue producing tomatoes because it needs the leaves to capture sunlight so it can produce more fruit. Forage plants and garden plants are different in many ways, but any plant needs to capture sunlight with green growing leaves to produce. But a big difference between that garden plant and that forage plant is that the same structure that can be considered the fruit on a forage plant is the same structure that captures sunlight to produce more of that fruit, the leaves. Managing grazing so that there is enough leaf area remaining to continue photosynthesizing to keep that forage plant healthy and producing is a very important goal in any grazing system. There are many other terms that are used interchangeably with rotational grazing, such as cell grazing, intensive grazing, management intensive grazing, strip grazing, or mob grazing, whether or not they are the same thing as rotational grazing. But all of them are different methods of managing grazing to achieve the goals of sustaining the plant, protecting the land, and feeding the livestock. Basically defined, rotational grazing is giving livestock a new grazing unit in a grazing schedule, allowing each grazing unit in a grazing operation to recover from a period of grazing. This enables those individual forage plants to continue to photosynthesize with adequate leaf area, regrow the grazed off leaves, and produce those plant essential carbohydrates that enables the plant to sustain itself and continue to grow, readying it for the next period of grazing. It also allows the forage to protect the soil with a canopy of grass leaves so rain can't dislodge soil particles leading to soil erosion. With a minimum of 4 grazing units, size approximately the same or with the same productive capability, each unit could be grazed a maximum of 7 days, and then the grazing animals would be moved to a fresh unit, giving each unit in the grazing system a rest period of 21 days before being grazed again. Another way to look at it is that each unit would be rested 75% of the time during the grazing season. Another important consideration is minimum forage height. Some producers manage their grazing operations with a graze half, leave half approach, meaning to graze off half the forage, but leave half of it to continue photosynthesizing to sustain the plant and ready it for the next round of grazing. Another way to approach this is to manage grazing so livestock are moved off a grazing unit when the average height across that unit is no less than 3 inches for the introduced cool season forages such as fescue, orchard grass, and annual ryegrass, and no less than 2 inches for the introduced warm season forages such as Bermuda grass, Dallas grass, and crabgrass. With good management and regular rainfall, when the grazing animals are moved back onto a grazing unit, the forage height should regrow to 6 to 8 inches, watching the minimum grazing height is very important and should be the determining factor as to when to move the animals to the next grazing unit rather than to stick to a rigid 7-day calendar. Sometimes the animals will take the forage down quicker than 7 days and the animals would need to move sooner. I'll make a quick comment here that native warm season grasses, which are extremely uncommon in a grazing system in this area, should not be grazed lower than 8 inches. Natives are great for wildlife-friendly plants for food and or cover, but when a producer is grazing domestic livestock, it's a whole new ballgame to grazing natives than grazing introduced species such as fescue or Bermuda grass that can be grazed a lot lower. By turning grazing animals into pasture that has been rested for a minimum of 21 days, we are hoping to have the animals grazing when the forage is in what we term phase 2 of the forage growth curve, when the vegetative regrowth and renewal of energy reserves is highest and the forage quality is best as the plant is photosynthesizing at its maximum. Let's talk about forage intake. It is harder for a grazing animal to get adequate forage in short pasture, especially ruminant animals such as cattle, sheep, and goats without an upper set of teeth. They are dependent on their tongues or prehensile lips to grasp forage and pull it into their mouths. Short, overgrazed pastures then limit the intake of forage for those grazing animals, those ruminant grazing animals, which in turn would affect daily weight gains and milk production. Look at the tongue on that cow. I didn't include that picture because it's humorous. That tongue is a specialized tool that she uses to wrap around forage and pull it into her mouth. And small ruminants are the same, except they have lips that are able to pull forage into their mouths. Horses, though not being ruminants, have an upper set of teeth that enables them to bite lower to the ground, a concern as horses tend to overgraze pastures, taking plants down lower than ruminant animals. But cattle, sheep, and goats need forage of adequate height so that they can grasp that forage either with their tongues like cattle or with their lips like sheep or goats. Managing grazing units so that the animals move into pastures with adequate forage regrowth of 6 to 8 inches ensures that there will be adequate forage for that grazing animal to be able to graze. And we can see what different classes of grazing livestock might need on a daily basis in dry weight forage. For instance, a lactating mama cow weighing 1,200 pounds would need 3% of her body weight, or about 36 pounds of dry weight forage a day. To ensure this needed intake, we need to keep adequate forage in front of these animals so that they can harvest easily, utilizing the grazing means that they have best available to them. Look at the way this dairy cow is able to reach out with her tongue and grasp a mouthful of good forage. Her forage intake is not limited by short, overgrazed pasture. And then here's a close-up of that tongue able to wrap around forage of sufficient height to facilitate a good mouthful. This is what we like to see with grazing animals, forage intake that's not limited by short, overgrazed pasture. What kind of forage intake would we expect on an overgrazed pasture like this? How could a ruminant animal get a good mouthful of forage on this pasture? The answer is, it can't. So that animal's intake will be seriously affected. I would like to wrap up this first part by looking at a classic picture that has been used many times in presentations about this subject. These grass plants were raised under differing grazing management methods, where the plant on the left was in a continuous grazing operation where there was essentially no management of the system, and the grazing animals were allowed to overgraze the plants throughout the growing season. As you look then to the plants as they are displayed to the right, you notice that not only is the amount of forage above what was the ground level increasing, but the amount of underground plant mass, the roots, also was greater. This is because each plant, as you go to the right, was given more time to recover from a period of grazing. We often say that the amount of forage plant above ground is a reflection of the amount of forage plant below ground. What would this tell you if, for instance, these grass plants were in a drought? Such as Doug mentioned, the 2011 drought. I think 2011 and 2012 were pretty difficult as far as droughts are concerned. In a severe drought such as those, you can see that those forage plants with the deeper, more extensive, and healthier root system would withstand a drought much better than overgrazed plants with corresponding short and stunted root systems. Forage plants with deeper, more extensive, and healthier root systems would be able to pull up soil moisture from deeper because they have a healthier root system. You could potentially have forage plants that would die because they have shallow root systems, since the above ground leaves have been overgrazed and the photosynthesizing part of the forage plants, the leaves, have not been able to maintain a healthy root system. Here's a graphical representation of the previous slide, showing the differing root response to post-grazing stubble, length of grazing period, and recovery allowed. Another point I would like to make here is that we often think that the underground part of a plant, the root system, is supporting the above ground part of the plant, and that's true. But the inverse is also true. The above ground part of the plant is also supporting the below ground part of the plant. One last thing I would like to talk about here is the grazing stick, which is a tool that can help you determine the amount of forage on a grazing unit, the forage utilization for different classes of livestock, the number of grazing days to figure for rotation as well. Because of limited time here, I won't get into a discussion of how to use the stick, but if you can get your hands on one, the information on it is real helpful for understanding some of the specifics related to any managed grazing system. We used to hand these sticks out to participants who attended grazing events and field days, at least my agency did, NRCS. But we've lost our sponsors, so these have become pretty rare commodities. They can still be purchased, though, if you can find them on the web. There are a lot of benefits to implementing a rotational grazing system: decreased feed costs, improved health and performance of your grazing animals, sustainability of the forage plants on the grazing land, and protection of your soil resource, much of which we have just talked about. Another benefit is improved nutrient cycling on a grazing unit. As animals graze in smaller units, drop their waste in a more concentrated area, which would also provide a ready source of nutrients for the resting and recovery of that pasture after the livestock have been moved to the next grazing unit. Also, managed grazing operations see an increase in weed control of certain weed species, as livestock will graze more of these weedy pasture invaders in a managed system than a continuously grazed system, especially if grazing small ruminants such as sheep or goats. To many landowners, a fence isn't a fence, unless it's a 5 or 6 strand barbed wire fiddle string type fence or a woven wire field fence like the one pictured here. Many landowners put in a good rotational grazing system with conventional fencing, such as barbed wire or woven wire, subdividing their pastures and establishing grazing units that work fine for their system. As long as each grazing subdivision can be completely closed off with its own source of water, so the livestock can be concentrated there for a maximum 7-day rotation before moving to the next grazing unit, you can operate a good rotational grazing system with conventional fencing. But for this portion of the presentation, I will be talking about permanent and temporary electric fencing, which is reliable, easier, and cheaper to install, and a lot more flexible if there are any changes needed in a grazing operation. Compared to that last slide, this picture of a double strand of high tensile electric fence doesn't look too impressive. But an electric fence isn't a physical barrier. It's a psychological barrier to your livestock. In the picture on this slide, 2 strands of high tensile electric wire is sufficient to hold a beef cattle operations livestock. On many beef cattle farms, a single strand is all that is used for interior grazing subdivision fences. The voltage in a properly installed electric fence can exceed 10,000 volts if hooked to a charger that is properly grounded. We recommend a minimum of 3,000 volts to turn a cow. Now, someone will ask the question, well, why doesn't that kind of voltage kill or seriously injure a grazing animal or a person that comes into contact with it? While I'm no electrician, I know it has to do with the pulse length. Modern or New Zealand style chargers pulse at about 45 to 60 times in a minute, and that pulse length is around 3/10,000ths of a second. When you or a grazing animal comes into contact with an electric fence, pulsing with these short pulse lengths, you complete the ground circuit, but will only receive a shock of 3/10,000ths of a second in length. That's enough to turn a grazing animal and to convince me that I don't want to come in contact with that again if I can help it. Believe me, it hurts. And as I've been shocked by electric fences several times over the years, and it's something I don't like. And we want the electric shock to impact the animal so that we, in effect, get in the animal's head or psychologically affect it so that it will not want to attempt going through that fence. There's a wide variety of electric chargers on the market, and this slide certainly doesn't show all the different ones available. While I can't recommend one brand over another, I do recommend that you purchase one that is low impedance, which relates to the pulse length, and high voltage, essentially what we term a New Zealand style charger. And anymore, I really don't know if there are any chargers available that are not a New Zealand style charger. These chargers are all rated in joules, which is kind of like a horsepower rating of the charger. The greater amount of electric fence wire that you're trying to electrify, the larger the joule rating the charger needs to be. You'll also want to use mainline or plug-in chargers if possible instead of battery-operated or solar chargers. Mainline chargers are just more reliable and are larger in joule rating than battery or solar-powered chargers, so that they can handle more in terms of the running speed of electric wire. Installing a mainline or plug-in charger with a surge protector and lightning protection is also very highly recommended. And here's a simple diagram that shows the grounding for an electric fencing system. A point to make here is the grounding systems need to be installed with copper or galvanized steel ground rods to make a good ground. Too many times, landowners will ground a system with rebar or just ground to a T-post. And while doing that may be effective for a while, rebar and T-posts rust. degrading the grounding ability of the metal in those materials to continue to function as effective grounds. And T-post anchors are only driven at the most about a foot in the soil. In dry weather, the upper portion of the soil profile will be the first to dry out and negatively impact the grounding ability of shallow grounding materials. And it's important, even if using ground rods made for that purpose, to drive the rod 6 feet in the ground if possible, as most ground rods are 6 feet long. We recommend 12.5 gauge high tensile steel wire that is type 3 galvanized with a tensile strength of 170,000 psi. And here's a picture of that wire mounted on a payout reel, also commonly referred to as a spinning jenny, which is an essential tool to use with rolls of this wire. This wire is durable, virtually unbreakable from livestock and wildlife pressure, and is large enough to carry sufficient voltage from a well-grounded charger. Also, this wire is malleable enough to be able to hand tie or twist on insulators. I'll make a comment here that there is 12.5 gauge high tensile steel type 3 galvanized wire on the market that is 200,000 psi that will work just fine, but it is not nearly as malleable as a 170,000 psi wire and much harder to twist to tie on insulators. Oftentimes it is cheaper though, and that's usually the reason why it's cheaper. Oops, let's see. There are a lot of different materials used for electric fence wire. There is electric wire that is smaller in gauge, made of aluminum, and not nearly as durable. In the long run, fencing made with these materials is not going to do an adequate job, regardless of how big the charger is or how well it might be grounded. I'll also make a comment here on electrifying barbed wire. Someone might think, well, barbed wire is good for a fence, and electric fencing is also good, so why not electrify barbed wire? A couple of reasons come to mind why you don't want to do this. For one, barbed wire is much more resistant to the flow of electricity than smooth high tensile steel wire. Barbed wire usually is made with 2 strands of twisted wire with barbs spaced along those strands every few inches. The twisted wire and the barbs are resistors to the directional flow of electricity and will decrease the amount of electricity down the length of the fence. Another big consideration is safety. If a person or an animal were to try to go through electrified barbed wire, they could get hung up in it and at the same time be getting shocked. A very unpleasant and very unsafe situation. For small ruminants, multiple strands of high tensile electric wire may be needed. Sheep and goats can be more determined to go through a fence, even if it's charged to its maximum output. This is certainly different than being able to use 1 or 2 strands of high tensile wire for cattle. Multiple strands of high tensile or electrified net wire, made especially for small ruminants, should be used. Insulators need to be UV or ultraviolet resistant. Since they are outside, they will be absorbing a lot of sunlight with UV radiation, which breaks down plastic, making it brittle. Brittle plastic will often break or crack, which could cause the insulator to be ineffective by causing a direct short in the system. Porcelain insulators, since they don't have any plastic in them, are UV resistant. Packaging of these plastic insulators will sometimes have a statement on UV protection, sometimes not. If the packaging states a 10-year warranty, it usually relates to the fact that the insulator is UV resistant. Sometimes the manufacturer needs to be contacted, though, to see if the product is UV resistant. Now let's talk a little about temporary electric fence. For those landowners with just conventional barbed or woven wire fence, you can still utilize temporary electric fence to concentrate grazing within a conventionally fenced system to improve a grazing operation. Small portable battery or solar powered chargers, polywire, and tread-in posts can help you accomplish those goals. Of course, you can also use temporary electric fence on an electric fence system, in which case you wouldn't need to purchase a battery or solar powered charger, as long as you can still connect the temporary electric fence to the permanent electric fence system. But if you do need to purchase a battery or solar powered charger, there are a lot of chargers on the market, and they are as well New Zealand styled with high voltage but short pulse length. Most of these chargers, whether battery operated or solar, aren't rated at much more than a joule, So using just a limited amount of temporary electric fence, no more than a half mile in most cases, is about all these units can handle. And while these chargers still need an adequate grounding system, they are able to operate adequately, usually with just one galvanized or copper ground rod. Placing those ground rods in locations that would be convenient can be challenging, though. Over time and with a lot of use, polywire, which is used for temporary electric fence, will break down and lose its ability to carry adequate current as the metal strands within the polywire braid will break. Good polywire will have 12 or more steel strands in it. I've seen some polywire with as few as 3. Laying out temporary electric fence can be done quickly using polywire reels. And it's important to get a reel that is specifically made for polywire. Extension cord reels won't stand up to the strain, and the plastic in them is not UV stabilized. UV resistant trading posts are also important since they will obviously be absorbing a lot of UV radiation. Good posts are also able to take a lot of bending pressure without breaking. I know that was a very rapid overview of electric fence, and I'm sure I've generated a lot of questions. For anyone serious about doing electric fencing right, I recommend they get a copy of this booklet put out by the Missouri NRCS. This is an excellent publication that covers all aspects of electric fence installations and components with great pictures and illustrations. For anyone interested in this free publication, please contact me at my email address that you see on this slide, and I will send this publication to you in PDF form as an attachment. Now for a quick overview of livestock watering systems. Developing adequate livestock watering points is the most important part of a rotational grazing, or any other kind of managed grazing system. You can have all the cross fencing to establish multiple grazing units, but if you don't have a source of livestock water in each grazing unit so that you don't have to keep a gate open so the livestock can access water in another field, you really haven't accomplished much. Once pastures are cross-fenced to establish a minimum of 4 pasture subdivisions, you need to make sure water is available to each grazing unit, as I already said. And you haven't accomplished anything, and it makes no sense to cross-fence the pasture to facilitate rotational grazing, and then have to leave the gate open so the livestock can get back to another pasture that has water in it from one that does not. In this area, we use 800 feet as a maximum distance for livestock, specifically a mama cow, to have to travel to get to water. I've been out to grazing lands in the west where cows hoof it sometimes a mile or more to get back to water. But in humid climates such as we have in this part of the country, the humidity and the heat are harder on a grazing animal traveling further than 800 feet than the regions like out west where the humidity is a lot lower. Keeping watering points at no greater than 800 feet also limits the amount of livestock trailing, which can cause compaction and erosion in pastures like you see in this particular slide. We have a lot of possibilities in this area for developing a watering system. It's important to consider, though, that in developing water, you don't want to limit intake, much the same as not wanting to limit intake on forage, but even more important. Old livestock watering systems that we have relied on for years in this area are ponds, creeks, and streams. And while the water quality of ponds and streams might get degraded because of direct livestock access, these water sources usually present a large surface area for all livestock to get adequate water. A lot of landowners like these plastic, freeze-proof, or frost-free waterers, and they are real handy in keeping the water from freezing. But with one of these waterers, the surface area for livestock to get to water is certainly limited. This particular landowner placed this freeze-proof waterer within a fence line so that each field on either side would be watered from this waterer. But there is only one hole available to each side, and this can be a big problem during the hottest part of the summer when livestock are going to need plenty of water intake. I recommend to landowners who want to put in these kinds of livestock water is to do what this particular landowner did on this slide, and that is to put in a frost-free hydrant as well, as you see in this picture. With a frost-free hydrant, you can put out a supplemental temporary tank with a float on it to ensure water intake is not limited during hot, dry weather. And of course, it's always handy to have a hydrant available out in the field for a variety of reasons. Used heavy equipment tires or used skidder tires are an excellent way to use a waste resource as a sturdy, impossible to tear up watering tank with plenty of surface area that won't limit livestock intake. Look at the surface area for those cows to drink from. And while tire tanks aren't necessarily freeze-proof, they are pretty easy to break ice off of, and the tire, being black, will absorb a lot of sunshine and help to keep the water surface ice-free. Here's another great resource from the Missouri NRCS that gets into the nuts and bolts of livestock watering. Again, it has great pictures and illustrations, and I could send this as a PDF to anyone that contacts me via email. There are a lot of resources out there on the web and in books, and I'm just going to touch on a few here. The Web Soil Survey, and we'll get into that in just a little bit, is very easy to use, even for those of us that might not be real computer savvy. As far as the book is concerned, Jim Garish is a nationally and internationally known and respected farmer and author whose book, Management Intensive Grazing, is a must-read for anyone interested in managed grazing. And I'm not promoting Jim's book per se. There are a lot of good publications out there, but this is one that comes to mind, and it's a primer on managed grazing. A must-read for anyone interested in this managed grazing. Jim worked at the University of Missouri for years and is one of the reasons why Missouri is a leader in managed grazing systems. Talk a little bit about the Web Soil Survey, and it's an excellent resource online for anyone wanting to know about the productivity of the soil that's mapped on your farm. And I'm just going to go through a couple of the slides here that show the Web Soil Survey page. You start on this site by clicking on the green Start Web Soil Survey button. And again, if you Google this, you'll come to this page. It is a public use page. Once you click on that green Start Web Soil Survey button, you'll have the whole of the U.S. before you. And over on the left panel, you'll see Click on Address, where I have it circled in red. And once you've clicked on address, you can type in your address and the map will zoom to your farm's location if the address that you type in is the same address as your farm's location. The information on the Web Soil Survey on forage productivity of the soil that is mapped on your farm is valuable in determining what to expect in forage production. And that is so important, knowing what to expect in productivity, because there's a huge difference in soils and landscape positions, such as streams and creek bottoms and terraces, compared to soils at the top of steeply sloping ridges and hilltops. Those are just a few of the many resources available to you and for more information on managed grazing. The last thing I'd like to say is that a grazing system should be as much about managing it to sustain the precious natural resources on your farm as it is about raising a product for market and making a profit. Remember, all the things that forage plants are doing for you. Properly managed in a grazing operation, a forage plant is sustaining itself, protecting the topsoil, and safeguarding water quality, as well as providing an inexpensive source of livestock feed. Managers need to learn to maximize that forage plant so that it can do all those things for you. And a managed grazing system, such as rotational grazing, is a method of doing that. Working for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, we are available to the public for any advice or technical information. I'm happy to come out to your farm and evaluate your particular situation, so please feel free to contact me for any further information. And I'll say this, of course, there's also financial assistance through NRCS that any landowner that is eligible for it can apply for any year that they want to apply for the assistance. I'll make a comment though, because of the current COVID situation, we aren't able to meet with landowners in office, but my contact information is on screen, my cell phone, and my email address, so please contact me at any time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Greg, for all of that information. Next up, we have Travis, who is our restoration specialist at IRWP. He's going to talk a little bit more about some of these restoration projects we've worked on, and also address to you guys about the program that we have available as well.
All right, go ahead and present. Okay, can you all see my screen?
I can see it, Travis.
All right. Okay, well, I'll go ahead. My name is Travis Cheney. I work for IRWP, and I manage our RIPARIAN restoration program. This is a $2.4 million funding program to restore, improve, protect 20 miles of riparian area. That's the area that adjacent to a stream that interfaces with the stream system. We're trying to restore 20 miles of riparian area over the next 5 years. And we have programs, we have practices that are applicable to urban areas. We work with municipalities, we work with residential landowners, but we have a big suite of practices that are applicable on farm, and that's what I want to cover today. Just to quickly, my background, you'll see this picture in the top right corner. This is me on the place I was farming on the Illinois River, Watts, Oklahoma, 2011 when we had that big flood. And so I've dealt a lot with water issues on farm, and so I've got a heart for farmers and ranchers who are trying to make it and deal with kind of pressing water management, land management issues. And so that it's something that's very important to me. And our priorities for this particular program, this riparian restoration program, specifically, we're trying to maintain dense, healthy vegetation along streams, wet weather creeks. So if you're a farmer or a rancher who has a stream or some sort of wet weather creek on your property, you may qualify for funding for this program. What we're trying to do is provide livestock an abundant, clean, off-stream source for water. You know, as Greg mentioned, there is a lot of surface area in your creek. If it flows year-round, it's pretty abundant. But as you may have seen, you know, oftentimes too many livestock for too long in one area is going to degrade that stream bank or the water quality in that stream. So what we're trying to help do is fund off-stream water sources so that your livestock have access to it, and so that you can be more flexible in your grazing system as you're trying to implement this rotational grazing system. So we're trying to fund the farm infrastructure needed as you implement your grazing plan. And as an organization, we want to see long-term economic and ecological health on farms and ranches in our watershed. With this particular program, we're focused on improving impaired watersheds. So our funding right now is going to a handful of priority sub-watersheds within the larger Illinois River watershed that are listed by the state as impaired for one reason or another. So those sub-watersheds would be Moore's Creek. So if you live somewhere around Lincoln, Arkansas, you more than likely drain to Moore's Creek. The lower Muddy Fork of the Illinois River. So if you live kind of in the Prairie Grove area, that might be you. If you live around the Lake Weddington area, that's a priority area for us. If you live in the Little Osage Creek subwatersheds, so that might be southwest of Bentonville, south of Centerton, Highfill area, even down to Healing Springs, Cave Springs area. You may be in one of our priority areas. If you live around Siloam Springs, Arkansas, or east of Springdale, we've got a lot of priority areas where we're working. Probably the easiest thing, if you're interested in implementing some of these rotational grazing practices, watering facilities, and you want to see if you qualify for IRWP funding, just shoot me an email, send me your address, and I can figure out pretty quickly whether you're in one of our priority areas. And even if you're not, we can still try and help connect you with technical resources. We can still help you with conservation planning. There's a lot we can do to assist you. So feel free to reach out. Some of the practices that we can fund as a part of our riparian restoration program are, basically any and all fencing materials as you try to either limit livestock access to your streams or implement a rotational grazing program. Polybraid and reels, step-in posts, chargers. Some ranchers are trying to water cattle out of ponds. We can help fund, ponds, shallow well pumps, permanent watering facilities, temporary watering facilities, heavy use area protection. So, around your watering facility, either doing concrete or gravel or some sort of aggregate that's going to prevent that from becoming a mud hole. Pipeline is another thing we fund. So getting water to whatever watering facility you're using, stabilized low water crossings. So if you're, mixing up and cross fencing your pasture and need a good stable place for livestock or your equipment to cross, we can help fund some sort of stabilized crossing like that. Revegetating stream banks. I've got just a few pictures here of projects we've done just this year. Tire tanks. You can't see, but there's a concrete heavy use area around this low water crossing. Here's a producer we were working with to install some fencing, and he actually still used draft horses. So we were skidding logs off the new fence line with draft horses. One example project, we can be almost as flexible as your grazing program is. There are a lot of things we can do to improve water quality. Here's one, for example. This landowner had 2 developed springs on his property. They were here and here. His family had been there a long time, and they had just some pipes coming out of a hillside. You can see in this top right, 6-inch pipe with water running out of it. And then that water ran across his pasture in an open ditch here and here. Each of them was over a half mile, and it's hard to tell, but his place was really, really flat and heavy clay soils, and cattle were in these ditches all the time, and his pasture stayed really muddy. And so what we did, we wound up taking these developed springs and continuing piping them underground across his property in some bigger 8-inch pipes, and then stubbing them up every so often, and putting tire tanks. You can kind of see where I illustrated that here. So it was a gravity fed system, water coming in, water going out to the next tank down, and then he's putting in cross fencing to subdivide this into smaller pastures. And so we were able to get this project on the ground and do something he'd been wanting to do for a long time, that not only helped his operation and helped the flexibility of his operation, but it's keeping cattle out of that open ditch that were in it 24/7. And the water would leave his farm and go straight into the lower Muddy Fort, which is an impaired sub-watershed in our bigger watershed. And there are a lot of other things we can provide other than just funding. We can help you with conservation planning, identify ecological resources on your property, help you, kind of meet your long-term land management goals. We can help develop a grazing plan like this one we put together for a landowner. We can help, with technical guidance for installing your watering systems. It's a cost share program. So IRWP will cover 75% of the cost of whatever practices we wind up installing. And then the landowner can meet their 25% cost share portion, either with cash, labor or equipment contributions, or if you're working with another organization like NRCS or Game and Fish, we can help use the money that you're using from that organization as your match on our program. So we try to make it as easy as possible for landowners to implement best management practices for water quality on their property. So if you have any questions about our program, whether you're in one of our priority areas, if you just want me to come out and pay you a visit and help you think through some land management challenges you have, please reach out. My email address is here. You can also, learn more about our program on our website. So thanks for letting me visit with you, and I look forward to hopefully talking with some folks in person.
Thank you for letting everyone know about our program, Travis. We
Sure
appreciate
thing. Yeah.
it. So at this time, we are open for Q&A. I just checked the Facebook and I didn't see any comments on there or questions on there. So if you're in the Google Meet and you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute and direct your question either to everyone as a whole or to one of these people in general.
I have a question. This is Nathan. So I have some paddocks I've fenced off to be smaller areas, and we have horses that we rotate through these smaller paddocks. But for some reason, it appears to me it's all Bermuda grass. But there are sections they'll eat right down to the ground, and there's other sections of Bermuda that they'll just leave standing at 8 inches tall. Is there any corrective action I can get them to graze that more evenly?
Doug or potentially Greg or Travis, do y'all have any comment?
I was going to give Greg first shot at that question.
And I think Greg may be muted.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Greg, can you unmute your phone? Is that possible? Well, Doug, we'll let you go first while he's getting it set up.
Okay, I'm going to kind of minimize this a little bit, and I'm going to try to see if I can find some pictures in here to help. You remind me how I share a picture.
You'll go to present now and then choose the window.
That was the tab. What didn't we? The tab work for us yesterday.
Yeah, if it's on the tab in your browser.
A window. Okay, it's under a window. Okay. Can everybody see this picture?
We see it.
Okay, what this is a Bermuda grass pasture early in the morning in about June. Okay, and I want to take you from this picture. Let's see if I can go and get another one. But what I want you to notice, what you should have noticed in that picture, there's all different kinds of species besides Bermuda grass. Okay, one of our questions I know we had before this was about, you know, what's the magic bullet forage for Northwest Arkansas? Well, there's not any magic one forage that's going to do everything you need. And we, you know, that's one of the things we learned in 2011, and we've learned in all the processes, you know, since then. And I'm trying to find. Okay. Okay, here's that same field last week. Okay, and what I didn't tell you about the other picture is last year I felt like this field didn't have enough cool season component into it. So we had a finisher down towards the far end down there that we were finishing out. It was a failed bull, and we castrated him. He'd blown a stifle muscle, and that's the type of animals that we eat for our own, you know, for our own purposes. But anyway, to get this field even, we came in August behind the cattle. They were grazing it, you know, because we got a little dry this summer. They were grazing this as summer stockpile. So in August, we came behind those cattle with brush hog. And when you do that, you know, you've got two choices. You either increase or the animal density, more animals in a smaller area, or you give them more time where they have to eat everything. So, like if that was talking about your horses, that, you might need to do that, but you may not want to do that because they may continue to overuse those small areas, and you end up with, forage that's overly mature versus forage that's overutilized. And so we would rather go in and let them use what they can and not, stress them out in that process and start losing performance. And we'll just bring a brush hog in behind and clip that pasture. And that resets the clock on all of those plants. And so then you come back to it and you're coming to all forage that's more even age. And like this particular picture here, this is going to be, this is the start of our winter stockpile. And the cattle will be in there around Christmas. Does that kind of help answer your question there about the horses?
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Morgan, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, this is Greg. I'm sorry that technology got the better of me there, and I had to dump out, but I didn't get to listen to all of Doug's response on that. But Northwest Arkansas, we deal with a lot of landowners that have horses, and that horse is just a difficult grazing animal to deal with for a number of reasons. I mean, I love a horse, but it's a difficult animal when you're trying to do a grazing system or do it right. For whatever reason that mare might graze a particular plant, whether it's Bermuda or fescue, one time, then the next time she comes around, she'll bite it again and she'll ignore the plant that's right next to it. And that plant that's right next to it will just get tougher and more rank. And she'll just keep biting that one other plant because it keeps putting out that more succulent, newer growth. It's a nature of a horse grazer, and I know that it's difficult at times to get that horse to be able to clean up after itself, to graze those other Bermuda grass plants that it ignored the last time it was grazing on that particular part of the pasture. So to me, it seems like the more that you can concentrate a horse to get her to try to clean up after herself, it's a challenge, but it's sometimes what I found to be the best thing to not give her so many choices as to what she wants to graze from one time to the next.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And I was just checking on Facebook. There don't seem to be any in the chat there. Does anyone else have any questions they want to bring up on the Google Meet?
Hi, everyone. This is Nicole. I'll ask a question of Doug. I know Doug maintains a very detailed grazing plan, but I was wondering if you could maybe speak to the basic elements of a grazing plan and the importance of one.
Yeah, I can do that. I won't get as detailed as what I did on the chart a couple of years ago. But you can use an Excel spreadsheet. You can use a blackboard. I've seen just little dry erase boards put up on a barn wall, and the guy had his he had his pastures kind of crudely drawn out, and he'd write in dates, when he was there, when they were out. And so it's, the grazing plan just allows you to keep track of where you are, when you were there, how long it's been recovered. You don't have to memorize, all of that information. And ours is very, very detailed, because I'll have, if I see a cow get bred, that goes into the grazing chart. If we've got vacation, that goes into the plan for the grazing chart. So I can, if we're not going to be there, then I need to do, be on vacation for 5 days. Then I've got to give those animals sufficient area in certain areas, sufficient amount of area in certain places. And, so I can come in before we leave and get the cattle settled in, and be able to move them when we get back. So it's an overall planner is what it is. And then there's I can show a couple pictures here of some other things that I put in the grazing chart, and that also go along with grazing planning. And so I'll try to get those shared here. Okay, a very simple tool when you're mapping this out is these phone apps are just crazy. You can get a phone app, I think, to brush your teeth, but it's just crazy on what you can do. So there's a lot of really good mapping apps that you can get that you can download on your phone, and you can see an aerial picture, and you can draw in your fence lines. That's a big deal. Well, how much area is this? And it's got a calculator there at the top. And what I was doing on this one, the right-hand fence coming south of the pond, it's one of our polywire. We're 90% polywire tread-in post. I've actually moved to the fiberglass post now because that plastic, maybe it's supposed to be UV resistant, but put it out there for 5 or 6 years and nay. And so I like the fiberglass a lot better. And we've got 20 plus some odd pastures that are, mainly fenced this way, and enough permanent infrastructure that we can keep bulls separate from females and do some other things like that. But anyway, so what I was doing is trying to work in and set this pasture up in a strip graze deal. And so I could just get on the map, and I could draw in the little pins, and it would draw the lines for me, tell me the acreage, and then I can look at that map here and just take a picture on my phone of it. And then when I go to the field to put that fence in, I can see, where it's going to cross, and I've got I know the landmarks because, it's boots on the ground, your place. And so a mapping, that's a must. You got to have some type of map, and it could be a photocopy, of an aerial of your place, and you just draw in the maps. So you got several copies, and you just draw in fences, as you go along, but I think the phone apps are really helpful there. And as you do this for a period of time, you will know how much acreage you need, because we only move twice a week. And so, 5 to 7.5 acres, that's about right. Like on this one, if I go to 4.8, we're going to put some pressure on the grass. And so we're probably going to have, need more recovery time. But the benefit of that is we're utilizing more of that grass more efficiently, and the regrowth will come back more robustly, given enough recovery time. And we actually, with a strip graze system, we see much higher utilization than what the NRCS web soil survey tells us we should have for that site. And that's under no fertility, no other management, but grazing or clipping, something like that. And then try to open up a couple more. I think, you start talking about, rainfall and droughts, and let me share this. People like to have something to read this time of year. Days are short, nights are long. If you want to know about drought and how humbling it was, this is a book to read, because the drought of 2011 does not compare to what the Choctaw people and our first settlers went through in the 1800s in this area of Arkansas all the way down into southeastern Oklahoma. And so, our environment's changed. We're very fortunate today that we have a lot of Corps of Engineer lakes, that those lakes have helped hold the humidity in our environment and got us away from some of these droughts that were, 10, 20 years in length. But that's a good read, that will kind of help you understand the magnitude of drought and understand the magnitude of, or the importance of planning. So to go along with that, part of my grazing chart, I keep track of conditions. This is the rainfall since 2016. Most of this is actually what's been poured out of my gauge. And if you take this year, can you see where my pointer is there? We're looking at May. The May average is about 6 inches. We're almost double that in May of this year. And then all of a sudden the spigot turns off, and here we are in June. It should be averaging about 4, and we're down at 2 inches. So, all the hay guys were griping because, the Bermuda hay, it was cool and wet in May, and then we were dry in June. And then, so Bermuda's not coming on. until July, mid-July, before they're even thinking about getting in those hay fields. And so keeping track of your rainfall, because we can't manage by a calendar, because these rainfall and weather events and all that, it doesn't know a calendar. It's what your conditions are, it's what your conditions are coming up, and what your conditions have been. And so, our recovery times can be anywhere from 20 some odd days when the grass is really just starting to grow and we need to spread cattle out and get over big areas quickly. But it can also be as long as 140 days or 150. In fact, where the cows are right now is a 150-day area recovered. And these are fall calving cows. That's the second pass they've made through that this fall. But I needed to impact that and severely graze that area to suppress some cool season. So I had some warm season growth come in. And so, our cattle adapt to that, and we have to be able to adapt to that need to change those conditions. And so through your, on the grazing chart, that's where you're going to record that. You're going to put a deferral line across for that pasture and know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you can have something to show when you go back and look at that area and it worked for you. You're like, okay, here's what we did, and this worked really well. Well, you've got this other area over here that's like that. Let's try the same thing. And so it's kind of a, your own little roadmap, the grazing chart. And then one of the questions we had was about carbon sequestration. Okay, can everybody see this graph? Hello?
Yes, we can see it, Doug.
Okay, all right, thank you. What is the growing degree days? These are little formulas that are based on temperature and conditions that determine or kind of estimate what forage growth is going to be. And so when you start thinking about carbon sequestration and probably what the most efficient way to do that, where I showed you the picture earlier, you've got a lot of biomass growing up tall. That's going to get to a point and that material is going to senesce and turn brown. You don't have a lot of green leaves out there. But it's okay to do that to preserve moisture, but you've got to get that brown material down and be able to grow new green leaves. If we're going to, start the photosynthesis process, which this drives all of this. We've got to have that plant photosynthesizing where it takes in carbon dioxide, splits the water molecule, and it sends the sugars down into the root system, and those sugars exit the plant as root exudates. About 60% of soil carbon comes from that process, from our grasses and our forbs. And so that's how we're building soil. That's how we're starting to get carbon into that soil. It's starting to, it's going to recycle. Just because we put it there doesn't mean it's going to stay. It's, that carbon, the carbon curve is going to go up and down over the year, up and down across the years and time as droughts and other conditions come in. But we have to have that photosynthesis process. And we're getting now over here, we're coming into December. And, you can look at all the little bars over those years. We're mid-December, we're done. We're not going to grow stuff. Plants are going to go kind of into a dormancy where they've built up their root reserves. They're not putting much energy into leaf growth. And so good time to graze your stockpile. Same thing in January and February. And actually down in Southeast Oklahoma, we'll start growing grass again around the 10th of February. You can see the change in the cattle behavior. You can start to see that greenish tint start to come up. But then here we are, March to November, that's when we can sequester our carbon. And the key is being able to manage those leaves like Greg talked about, where we've got a lot of, we want to optimize our green leaf material out there. But at the same time, we've got to be mindful that here in the middle of the year, we can get awfully dry in June, July, August, and September. So we've got to have a reserve. So we kind of got to balance those two things along. And that's what we're learning. This is, we can't maximize any one thing. We have to start thinking about balance, on a daily, monthly, and long-term, decade balance to make the whole system work. But if you're going to put carbon in your soil, you've got to have grasses and forbs, in my opinion. And, you've got to manage that photosynthesis process. You've got to keep those solar panels out there collecting sunlight, putting root exudates in the soil. And it's an observation thing. You know, it's something you have to do on your place under your conditions and learn about. And so does that help answer your questions there, Nicole?
Yes, sir, definitely. Thank you.
Well,
I think I have one for you, Doug. So
okay.
put a link to an article that I did an interview with the Rotational Grazing, someone who practices it, and he spoke about how the temperament of his cattle changed when he switched to this system. Can you speak to that as well?
Sure. You know, I have a limited time on the ranch, and you know, behavioral issues a lot of times stem to cattle that don't quite fit the environment. You know, they don't feel good, and it's just like you. When you don't feel good, you act out. And those cattle, you know, they can, when we don't have a lot of time to make these moves. You know, it's time to move. We need to go. You know, I can't have you running to the back 40 or in the corral when we're working cattle and you're back there bouncing off the wall. You know, you're going to hurt somebody. So those cattle leave. And then we've got other, you know, I'm real big on cattle behavior. It's like I had 3 NRCS agents with me Monday, and we're out there and we walk through the cow herd, and the cow herd's never seen, you know, they usually see me, but I was looking at the behavior. You know, they're looking at the cows. I'm looking at the behavior. I want to see that cow that, you know, notices strangers in her pasture. She goes to her calf, she gathers it up, and she sits back and stares at you because she's doing her job. You know, she's mothering that calf. She's going to protect it if she needs to. But at the same token, I don't want a cow when, you know, if I've got to touch a baby or do something, she's coming to get me. And I've got one of those. It's like, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't touch your calf. You know, you're going to raise your calf. I understand you can do it. I don't need to touch your calf. You know, I can visually estimate a birth weight, and that's fine. But yeah, I've got a kind of a picture, you know, some pictures of some cows here. And, you know, a lot of these are taken when my wife is out there. You know, she's the photographer. And so everybody can see that. Yes.
We can.
Okay. All right. This is about, you know, late May, early June. And, you know, we've got the diversity out there. These are 2 first calf heifers and the calves they're raising. You know, that is our future. We can do all the landscaping work we want. We can do all the grazing management we want. But if our cattle are not performing, you know, we're not going to be able to generate the cash and the future replacements that make us sustainable. So, you know, in my mind, the cattle performance, it has to be there, you know, and we don't want to be feeding a bunch of fed feed to get that performance. But there's times of the year that cattle are going to need a little extra. But these heifers have calved right with their fall calving heifers. They calve right with their mothers, and, you know, they raise their calves with their mothers, and that's how that works. But in our environment, fall is not going to work very well. Most of those will end up being spring cows, and we don't have enough fescue cool season component to make it work. But, you know, it's just something you know, like I said, every day, every year is a new learning. But behavior, you can look, they're content. And every time I go to move or think about cattle, I'm looking and I'm listening. And if cattle are content, they're quiet. When cattle start to talk, something's wrong. Okay, if my cows are bellowing when they hear trucks, they're in getting down to this time of year, you know, groceries can get a little short after 3 or 4 days on a graze. You know, they're wanting that new grass, or they're wanting a little supplement to help them along. And, you know, you have to, you learn to pay attention to cattle contentment, like you look at manure or any of the other indicators of performance and animal well-being. So I can probably dig up another cow picture, and this one will be relevant to, you know, again, to where we are now. Okay, everybody kind of see that? That's one of our mature fall calving cows. She's, I don't know, 6 or 8 now. She's getting old enough where I know what she can produce and what she can do. And, you know, she's raised some knockout heifers for us. But, This area was an area that I clipped right behind the cows in August. And then we had a rain coming in first part of September. So I drilled some annuals in there. We do a little bit of that in these Bermuda grass fescue pastures. But, you know, this is the first pass on a fall calving pasture, and we will be back on this area after 42 days. Now, there's not going to be enough brown material, but there's enough green material to satisfy, you know, the high quality part of her diet. So we'll probably need a bale of hay, you know, when we get to here, you know, just to keep that contentment. But if you look at her behavior, you know, she's calm, alert, and attentive. And that's the behavior that I don't like the word docile or any of this other stuff. I want that cow calm, and I want her alert. She's looking at me or whatever else is in her pasture. She's paying attention to what goes on. Those are your great mothers. And then attentive to her calf. You know, when my wife was with me that day, you know, she's talking to that calf, and she's going to that calf, and she's going to mother up inside it. And if she needs to protect it, she will. You know, so, you know, behavior is important. And that's, you know, middle of the day, here we are. You know, that was actually the 1st of November. How many people do you see feeding hay in the 1st of November? These cows don't need it. You know, they didn't need anything. I mean, they're having their babies. You know, the forage is more than ample. It's actually past the requirements of what a cow would need. If you're looking at manure, it starts to get a little bit loose, but it's back to that contentment deal. We can go out and walk around, and nobody's at the gate stomping a mud hole, waiting on the feed truck to show up. You know, they're taking care of themselves, and the efforts of our restorative management, regenerative management, it's starting to pay dividends. But yeah, that's, you know, behaviors, it's critical, and it's every time you're there. And because, you know, cattle are great at hiding little issues from you, but if you watch them close enough, long enough, you'll catch things that go on, you know, that most people won't. And the advantage of the rotational grazing systems, we're in smaller areas, and so you don't have to go hunt somebody down, and, you know, they can't run and hide as far away. So if somebody's off by themselves, you know, go take a look. Something's wrong. You may not figure it out that day, but, you know, in a couple of weeks you may.
Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
I'll ask one more time if there's any questions from the audience. Got a little over 10 minutes left. Okay, well, I'm sure you guys will think of them as you all this kind of settles in. Definitely feel free to reach out if you need any further resources. Travis and Nicole and I are all available. And thank you all for participating today. And Doug and Greg, we really appreciate having you and having your expertise, being able to provide that to our supporters. So
Happy to have done it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and I you know, enjoy these opportunities anytime to, you know, talk about cattle grass. And I didn't get to any fire or timber standing, but I know timber stand thinning, but I know that y'all do some of that work. So, you know, and we do as well. And that's something I have noticed over, you know, from Northwest Arkansas all the way to Southeast Oklahoma. You know, a big problem that we face is brush encroachment, and you know, that affects your water cycle, that affects your droughts. Your available forage, and at some point in time, you know, I think people will see what we see. When you start to address brush encroachment, you start to change the water cycle, and life gets better for you.
okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and close the meeting. Again, we appreciate you all being here, and this meeting will be recorded, so we will send out links for you to watch it later. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Have a good day.